So we found our why, and we've made this decision. We're going to go down the route of internal succession in our business. We've got our why. We're ready to do the work. We know it's going to be difficult, but we believe in the rewards at the end. Where do we start? Where do we start this thing? Because there's so many elements. We might be far away from actually executing some sort of transition plan. So how do we start to lay the foundation for ourselves and for the rest of our organization when we've said, I think this is the path I want to explore?
Yeah, good question. I believe, as I would imagine you do, that the foundation for, even separate from business, the foundation for a rich and fulfilling life is trustworthy relationships. And the more trustworthy relationships we can build, the greater rewards will be extracted in our life. And I think that translates really well to the question you asked is, okay, we've decided that we have a strong why, a strong purpose for the business going beyond us. We've decided that the best way to get there is through the challenging route of internal succession. The first step, and of course, when I say first step, it's a step in process, or you wouldn't even have a successful business to begin with, is to be very intentional about building trustworthy relationships. And of course, the first and most obvious thing it takes is for the person that's initiating that to already be a trustworthy person themselves. And not to be overly negative, but in a number of the situations that we're asked to participate in or advise in, we need to spend time up front overcoming trust gaps that have been created in that organization previously. And when we talk about trust gaps, let's be a little careful and ask questions if I'm off track here. But when we talk about trust gaps, we're not only talking about character issues.
Correct.
Because if they were character issues and you knew that you were working for a person who was not trustworthy with respect to what was legal or what was permissible within a certain industry, you probably wouldn't be there anyhow, and you certainly wouldn't be engaged in that. But trust also goes to commitment, to follow through, to remembering that we had this conversation in the past and we said we would bring it back a year from now and then we didn't, to people not fulfilling commitments. And so most of us have a little bit of that, if not a lot of that, somewhere in our life, because none of us are perfect. So the starting point is to shore up that those trustworthy relationships, and even to be very straightforward and vulnerable about the people that you're hoping will engage with you in this internal succession process, and to get that out on the table.
Yep.
What are your concerns or even doubts about my willingness to follow through on that? And would you identify some situations in the past that would be seeds of that doubt? And maybe we can have a conversation and overcome that. So that takes a lot of honesty right there, a lot of vulnerability right there, and entering into that ocean of vulnerability and honesty builds trust if we're willing to wade in and navigate the waves that come with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because a lot of the time
you got to start there.
And a lot of the time that's the hardest part is starting there.
Yeah.
One of the pieces of advice you gave me a while ago was, when you're dealing with something that you're worried about, you're concerned about within your business, the best thing to do is shine a light on it.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of what we're talking about. And you need to think about that as well from the perspective of the rest of your team. There's things that are in the darkness, so to speak, to them that they're worried about, that they're concerned about. You might believe you've communicated clearly to them. You might believe you say enough times, where are we going? What are we trying to accomplish? But you need to say that a lot more than you think you do. And you and I have to do this just like everybody else to really ingrain that within your employees and your team. I think you also need to be really careful what you say that carries weight into the future. So for instance, you might be sitting down, you might be in a more relaxed environment. This is where I need to be really intentional about this, and you probably do too. You might be in a relaxed environment. Maybe you're out to lunch with one of your team members. It's someone you like, somebody you know, somebody you already have some sort of trust built with them. You have to make sure that you don't say something in a free-flowing conversation that you haven't intentionally thought about in the future that would carry weight for that individual person.
You're saying it in maybe a casual way. Oh, maybe we'll get to that someday. And that person's, they're hanging their hat on it at that point.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, I had a friend who was in a small business, in a business that he really enjoyed with he had a really good boss, we could call him, the one who owned the business. An outstanding person, outstanding business leader. But he basically had a perpetual 3-year timeline on a succession plan.
3 years kept moving 1 year into the future.
The 3 years timeline was always 3 years for about 8 years. And my friend eventually said, I've heard it enough. And again, we're talking about a good person, a good business, a trustworthy person. But he eventually got to the point he said, I can't trust that this is ever going to come to fruition.
Let me ask you a question there, because I obviously don't know who or what you're talking about, nor do I need to. But did that younger person go to the owner and say, could we have a conversation about this 3-year thing?
Yeah. A few times, probably not as much as he should have, to maybe hit on a point there. But the issue was there was no systematic process in place to have this conversation. It was all ad hoc. So they'd be in their strategic planning retreat, and his boss would say, "Yep, we're looking forward to at some point in the future. We want you to be a part of this." And some time would go by, and maybe then they're out to lunch, and my friend would say, "Hey, remember we talked about?" Yeah. Oh, I've got to do this or that. But then you get back to the office and you've got work to do.
And it wouldn't quite get done.
Exactly. So in that element of trust, transparency, open communication, how can we set up a consistent process that assures that we're not doing this ad hoc? Because you and I both know if we do this ad hoc, it is not going to work.
Yeah. Well, and you and I would both believe this. We're both planners. You need to put a plan in place, and that plan takes time. And because most smaller businesses constantly have urgencies coming up, legitimate urgencies, taking care of our employees, our clients, and our community, can fill every day, 5 days a week, 6 days a week, and legitimately so. We're driving value. How do you insert into that fast-paced, value-producing, urgent life that you've been living for many years? How do you put in the middle of that intentional opportunities to begin a process like you're talking about? And I think a lot of what I see, frankly, is that in the back of their mind, the first generation person knows that, but then they have the excuse that they're too busy and there's lots of other things to do and they're continuing to build value. But on top of that, they're used to operating, excuse the term, but by the seat of their pants. And they've been relatively successful doing that.
Right.
The problem is that internal succession is probably not going to be done well by the seat of your pants.
Right.
And so, our recommendation, it always is, and it's sometimes accomplished by starting a relationship with somebody that has expertise in transition and succession planning, is to say, we are going to set aside intentional time. We're going to get the right discussions on the agenda, and we're going to do this in a process-oriented way. And that was really what I needed to do within the context of our business. Started that 6 years before the point that we're at now, and just took significant planned time on a quarterly basis to work our way toward that. And even though I believe we have good, strong, trustworthy relationships between the players in the drama, we still needed that time. And
Right.
there were still some detours and some unplanned routes that we had to navigate.
Yep. And you have to set up for that expectation.
You do.
Would you agree that?
I would, yeah.
Yes, we have to plan,
Yeah.
but we're also going to need to be flexible because things are going to happen that we don't expect.
But, the unexpected things can be expected.
Sure.
And by that, I mean, if you're a business owner or operator, you know that there's going to be certain incursions on your business that you can't completely control. You don't know what they're going to be, but you know that they're going to be. Yeah. So just put that in the plan and say, hey, we know that's something like that is probably going to happen in the next quarter. We don't know the severity of it, but that's not going to get us off from the fact that on the first Friday of the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th months of this year, we're going to go off-site. We're going to spend a half a day together, and we're going to work on this trust building process.
Yeah, and really, when you put it that way, in the grand scheme of things, 2 total working days out of the whole year is what you just said, and maybe it's more, maybe it's less, depending on where you're in your phase.
Probably more.
But overall, it's not this inward amount of time that's going to damage the growth of your business.
It certainly shouldn't.
Or it certainly shouldn't, right, or leave clients in a lurch. So let's think a little bit about what some of those meetings and discussions should look like.
Yeah.
I know one of the things that you and I both strongly believe, and we've been very fortunate to experience in our own businesses, is we need to make sure that we're intentional about building the relationships with our partners and our future partners, not just in the business, but outside of the business as well. And you and I are both very fortunate to be able to call our partners some of our best friends.
Yeah, it's very fortunate.
Which is remarkable. How do we do that?
Yeah, we use I like alliteration and I like threes, as you know. So we have used this in our own business, and we use it with our clients that we're privileged to help. We think of them as the 3 C's, and we call them cohesion, clarity, and communication. So initially you're asking about cohesion. How do you build cohesion among a group of people, whether it's a group of friends from college or your golfing buddies or your extended family? You're not going to do it without spending time together. And that time spent together when you're talking about business can't, in my view, always be strictly focused on the business. Maybe it is a majority of the time, and that's probably appropriate. But in addition to that, I think we just need to spend time together. If there's spouses involved, they're involved in a business transaction. They're affected by a business transaction. They may be asked to sign a bank note at some point. They may be asked to sign security for a bank loan to buy into a business at some point. They should be included in that as well. So we've had some success with that over the years by tying together our off-site business sessions then with something that's fun and enjoyable, whether it's a little trip or a dinner or an off-site enjoyable place to go off-site where you can hike and have some time outside, or whatever those things might be that can build cohesion between a group of people. And so I think you need to be doing both those things. And then if we can see, particularly we're looking at the first generation person, or it could be second or third, but whoever's eventually doing the selling or the transition, that person has a consistency to their life. That the way in which they behave and execute on commitments inside of the business is similar to the way they do it outside of the business. That is extremely helpful. And I think when we expose ourselves to spending time together in different settings, we build that trust based on a consistency of human behavior.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that's really important as well for that first generation owner to see in their future successors also, because, when we're in business mode, we want to have consistency of character, but our personality is going to shift a little bit depending on the environment that we're in. And I think we need to make sure that we don't forget the human element of all of us. And we also want to make sure that we're getting into business with good people. Good business people, absolutely, but good people as well. And again, we've both been
people who align
with
the purpose and values of your business.
Yes.
Because that good can have many different iterations. But for you have, I think, 5 core values at Masters.
4,
4, thank you.
Yep.
So people need to, on a consistent basis, show an alignment with those 4 core values, similar to us. Really not, it would be irresponsible for me to invite someone into the succession process, the ownership process, that didn't consistently, both in their personal life and their professional life, show an alignment with that value system. Because otherwise, the basis of the business is going to start to erode.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so again, that cohesion, that time spent together, there's a cost to it, clearly. But the rewards I've found are much greater than the cost.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
So what about that clarity piece? Because I know that's something that, especially at the beginning, we can get a little nervous about, especially if you're a first generation, 100% owner of your business. You haven't opened the books to anyone outside of your accountant. You haven't opened the back door to all these other elements of your business. How can we wade into that comfortably?
Yeah, well, I think that to some degree that's experience and personality based. I often use the example, I like to know the generational life story of people. Because when I know the generational life story of people, I can begin to put together a sense of the degree to which that person is able to quickly or not so quickly enter into trustworthy relationships. For me, the most common example would be, I love to know what if the person is male, I'd love to know what their father was like and their grandfather was like. Female, I probably follow the same gender pattern. Why do I want to know that? Because if they have had trustworthy relationships demonstrated throughout their life, they're going to more easily come, in most cases, more easily come to trust us. There are some personality issues, and it's not just family, because I also want to know if they've been involved in other business relationships, who have been their male role models or father figures or bosses in the past, and what kind of relationships have they experienced. So does that mean that I wouldn't enter into building a trustworthy relationship with somebody who had an absent father or had a very poor boss? Well, of course not. I just want to be cognizant and even empathetic to the fact that when they're not getting to trust as quickly as I am, that there might be reasons outside of our relationship that would affect that. And I think too easily we say, oh, geez, I think I'm the most trustworthy person this guy's ever met, and yet I don't think he really trusts me yet. These numbers that I showed him, I don't think he even thinks they're accurate. Well, it may not have very little to do with you and more to do with life history. And I think we just put that into the continuum. We understand that this is going to take longer. And that's part of the journey. And if that person has the potential to carry your purpose into the future, am I willing to invest a little bit longer in building a trustworthy relationship and hopefully demonstrating my own consistent trustworthiness to that person so that the memories of other untrustworthy people in their past begin to fade?
So we need to intentionally create an atmosphere to share those stories.
Yes,
because,
absolutely.
You know, unfortunately, we see that a lot in our business. Someone comes to us and we ask about their experiences with money, and unfortunately, a lot of them have been burned by some other advisor, some other family member, and certainly that can happen in business as well. So if we have that context of understanding, in some ways it's strategic as well, because we're going to approach that situation differently than if we know there's someone else who has experienced trustworthy relationships their entire life. And in a lot of ways, it's just innate to them. And it doesn't take a lot for them to get over the hump. Where somebody else, we may need to take a different path to approach that.
If I could, I'd like to make another point on this clarity issue. And this is one I've been sharing pretty often with people that are entering into a transition process. And it relates to the story that you told earlier about the moving 3-year target. I think it is extremely helpful and important for the person who needs to initiate the transition, the seller, if you will, to set firm dates, to set a date. And I'll use my own example, is that in order to initiate the process that we're now well into, I felt that I needed to choose a sell date. a date when I would divest myself of my equity interest in the firm. And that has some risk associated with it. But again, I had a strong why. We talked about that in a previous podcast that made that more comfortable for me to do. The date that I ended up choosing was relatively arbitrary, but what it did is it set a destination.
It puts that stake in the ground.
It puts that stake in the ground. So we have now what in our business we call a current location, and we have a desired future state, which is transition of the business to other trustworthy people that can carry the mission into the future. But now we're putting a firm timeline on it. Now we know whether that's 18 months or whether it's 6 years. We need to accomplish a certain amount of cohesion, a lot of cohesion, a lot of clarity, and a whole lot of communication within that time period. And then we can go about it in a process-oriented basis, just like we would working for a client.
And in some ways, that acts as a forcing mechanism to be intentional about the conversation. It puts a bit more of a sense of urgency on something that you're otherwise probably not going to have as much a sense of urgency on. And I guess that would bleed right into the third C of communication. It gives us a clear foundation to know what do we need to communicate, who do we need to communicate it to, and when do we need to communicate it.
And the key here, and everybody knows Gary and Roger North are going to say this, but it's intentionality. It's sticking with the plan. And again, there are going to be detours along the way. Often the detours are externally imposed. A year that's not as good as we hoped it would be financially. Maybe the valuation of our business even goes backwards in a year. Well, welcome to business.
Right.
Do we need to deal? Well, of course we need to deal with that. But I don't know that we should treat that as something that we go on an exit ramp and start heading west when we were previously headed south. That's not the way to accomplish this. And so I just want to ask some people out there that might be thinking about their first steps in transition, do you have the courage to set a date? And if you do, you will do your succession plan and your successors a wonderful favor. It's a gift.
That's a gift. And for you as well, because you know what you're in it. And like you said, it takes courage.
It takes courage.
Now I have to name the end of something that I've spent likely decades building. That takes some courage. We have to get over that.
It takes a belief in your own mortality too.
That's true. That's true.
And that's a challenge for some folks as well.
That's true. Yeah. Well, we're going to hear a little bit more about how you went on that journey. Next, we're going to talk a little about your journey in business and your journey in succession planning. So we'll roll right into that conversation next.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.